Welcome back to the BTR Garage. My name is Justin. In today's video, we're gonna be bringing you up to speed with everything that I have done to my Time Attack BMW. It's been a long time since we talked about this car and a lot of stuff has changed. So before we get into the race season for 2023, we're gonna go back in time a little bit to when I first got the car and kind of go over the modification and development phase from the beginning. So this car is actually really old and I got it almost 9 years ago. And believe it or not, I bought this car when it was bone stock, a 1994 325 IS with almost 200,000 miles on the car. And it wasn't in the greatest shape, but it ran good. Didn't have a whole lot of oil leaks, the typical BMW oil leaks and things. But the body was in good shape, the chassis was in good shape, and it was a good candidate for a race car. And this thing actually started off as an autocross car. Like I said, I bought it stock with the intent of racing it in SCCA autocross in the street touring class. I ran in the street classes originally for a while I was getting modifications and upgrades for it. And surprisingly, the cars are a ton of fun, even in stock form and the street class form. Let's slide in here. But like I said, eventually I wanted to run it in the STX class, the Street Touring Extreme class, which at the time in 2014, even 2015, these cars were still somewhat competitive. The 86s hadn't quite taken over, and you could get a BMW for super cheap. I literally paid $2,000 for this car when I bought it in stock form. I had to put in a bunch of money into maintenance and things like that. The car literally died on me and I had to have it towed like 2 days after I bought it because the belt tensioners had failed and they had slipped off basically, so I had no cooling. The water pump wasn't spinning and the car nearly overheated. But anyways, I got it towed back to the house, got that fixed. So that was like the very first thing that we fixed, among with other things in the cooling system. And then over the years, it just kind of progressed. I ran it in autocross for maybe 2 years, a year and a half, before I ultimately realized that these things weren't competing with the FRS and the BRZ. And I bought my FRS to replace this as a full-time autocross car, and then pretty much set this car up for HPDE and track days and working towards eventually my competition and time trial license with NASA. So fast forwarding through that a little bit, we did a couple rounds of upgrades and modifications with the car. For the first bits of suspension and upgrades, I had TC Klein double adjustable coilovers on the car. I've always had the Eibach sway bars on the car, front and rear. Obviously for autocross, I just ran the front bar. Camber plates, of course, wheels and tires, and just general bolt-ons for the engine, headers, exhaust, intake, that kind of thing. All of that stuff we could use in autocross, and eventually, obviously, we kept it for the track and then upgraded it. But several phases of upgrades kind of gets it to where it is today. I did, I don't know, 2 years or so, maybe a year and a half of HPDE as I went through HPDE 2, 3, and 4. I had already had my SCCA time trial license before doing NASA, so I kind of went up pretty quickly in NASA, but I also failed my NASA time trials check ride the first time. I did a video on this a while back when I actually went through the test, but yeah, I failed my time trial license the first time just for missing a black flag basically. So testing you on awareness, you do have to pay attention to those things. But anyways, got the time trial license, started building the car specifically for TT5, I don't know, 4 years or so ago, and I've continued to kind of develop it for time trials and time attacks since then. And since I run NASA primarily, the car is built pretty much specifically to the rules of NASA, which doesn't always apply well to things like grid life. And grid life, this is a track modified car, which I am competing against cars that have 2, 3, 4 times the amount of horsepower that I do, which is ridiculous, but that's the way that it works in grid life. So I don't really compete in grid life competitively, just do it for fun. But let's pop the hood here. Let's get into, I guess, modifications, where the car sits today, what it has done to it, and kind of what we've got for the future. Because like I said, I do have some things to fix specifically with the S52 to get it running optimally. And also we're reclassing for TT4 in NASA, which I haven't really run competitively before. TT5 we ran competitively for a couple years, like I mentioned. But okay, modifications on the car. So we can start with suspension stuff. So the key to this car is the MCS suspension. So MCS double adjustable coil-over suspension. Obviously in the rear it's a trailing arm, but in the front it's a coil-over suspension. These are MCS two-ways, like I mentioned, that do not have remote reservoirs, and that is on purpose because of time attack rules for racing within NASA. If you have remote reservoirs on your suspension, you do take a penalty for that, which means you basically have to run more weight or less horsepower. So we do that to keep our penalty points down so we can have the car be more powerful and lighter. But MCS is the key to this car. The MCS suspension is amazing. I had that on my BRZ as well, and I'll have it on my GR86 here soon enough. Vorschlag camber plates on the car to maximize the camber. And we have Hyperco springs and spring helpers on the car all around. And in the rear, we do also have Vorschlag top mounts for the shocks as well. And what else for suspension here? So I mentioned the Eibach sway bars. We have a big Eibach sway bar in the front. You can kind of see it underneath there. It is a pretty thick one. I forget what the size of it is. I'll add it in text on the video overlay here. And in the rear, we also have the same matching Eibach bar to keep the balance consistent front to rear. And BMWs are notorious for breaking sway bar mounts. So these sway bar mounts have all been welded and reinforced, as is the subframe down below for the differential. But from a suspension perspective, that pretty much covers it. Other things that we've done to the chassis of the car, I guess you could say, we've got the Aero, of course, we've got brakes, we have M3 brakes and parts in the front end. So a whole lot of the car in the front is all M3 parts. So M3 rotors, spindles, hubs, brake calipers. These are much larger and much bigger than the OEM 325 IS stuff. The rear brakes are stock other than the rotor itself. It's just a slotted rotor, and of course we have track pads for brake pads. These are Hawk DTC 70s in the front, and we have Hawk DTC 60s in the rear. And we also have Hardin Motorsports V2 brake ducts down here as well. These are pretty recent upgrades. I had the original brake ducts on here before, which didn't have this big plastic section, which still is not a perfect design because I've worn through them from the tire touching on the inside here. But those brake ducts go through to the front of the M3 bumper, which actually was an addition as well, but that's where our brake duct goes into. Our M3 bumper, this is just an eBay, I don't know, $150 bumper. They work awesome because they come in black already, and they're actually super durable, super cheap, and they fit pretty much perfect. The splitter on the front here, this is a custom cut piece of Alumilite. So my Race Shop SCR Performance back in Loveland, Colorado built this for me. They do this on pretty much all of their race cars that are using splitters like this. But it's basically a big flat piece of Alumilite cut to the specific dimensions to match the TT5 rule set, which basically says you can't come out 4 inches or more than 4 inches rather from the fascia of the bumper, and there has to be at least 1 inch of bumper piece right here. It's different for TT4, not by much. So I'm pretty much just gonna leave this as it is, still in the TT5 spec, but that is the front splitter. You can kind of see how it goes right up to the front hub or axle, I guess you could say. And then sticking with the Aero, we also have a Zebulon Motorsports rear wing. This is a full carbon fiber wing with aluminum mounts in the back. At least I think they're aluminum. Awesome wing with a lot of adjustability, and this is actually one of their older models. Still very good, very nice. At some point I may upgrade this because again, the rules are different for TT4 than they are with TT5. But for now, that will do. So wheels and tires, I didn't really talk about those too much, but I have 2 sets of these Apex Arc 8s in 17 by 9.5 size wheels and Hoosier R7 slicks for tires. I have R7s, which is the race version of the tire, meant for longer stints or longer sessions. I can actually use an A7, which is the autocross version of the Hoosier tire in TT4. I have R7s because A7s were not allowed in TT5. So I'll be running the R7 in TT4, at least for now, until I figure out how exactly we're gonna class the thing for TT4. And then there's a bunch of stuff underneath the car that's a little bit more tricky to see, but basically I've got bushings and upgraded engine mounts and transmission mounts and things pretty much anywhere where we could add them. So we have PowerFlex bushings in a lot of spaces in the car. You can kind of see under the lollipops right there. Anywhere you see those purple bushings, that is a PowerFlex bushing. Got rev shift motor mounts up in here. Hopefully they can be seen, those green motor mounts. We'll back out towards the rear. We've got rear subframe mounts as well. Let's see if we can see them here. So up in that area is where the subframe mounts are. Differential mounts as well. And I did forget to mention, as part of the suspension stuff, the SPC lower control arms here. These are nice because they retain the OEM bushings. You don't have like an eccentric bushing, which is actually penalty points when it comes to the racing classes. There's also a PowerFlex bushing up in here in the trailing arm. Kind of hard to see again. These trailing arm pockets have also been welded and reinforced because they're a known breakage point on these cars. But that kind of sums up that. Pretty much bushings anywhere we can put them in the car. And then from a driveline perspective, I shouldn't say driveline, drivetrain, we've got an M3 differential back here as well with a 373 drive ratio on it. And while I'm under here, you can also see the Bimmer World race exhaust. That's a 3-inch race exhaust as well. So with that, we can maybe move back to the front of the car and go over the engine situation. Like I said, this car, originally when it was stock, it was a 325 IS. It had the M50 2.5 liter engine, made very little power, like 185 horsepower and a measly 165 pound-feet of torque. So kind of like these cars, the previous generation, low power, low torque. So the S52 power plant, this is a big upgrade over the M50 that was in there. I bought the engine for $1,000 used from a friend of mine back in Colorado. It had been sitting in their garage for who knows how long, at least 10 years. So I got a good deal on it, picked it up, got it installed in the car, and it started up and ran okay. But like I said, the head gasket was kind of old, and in the rear on the cylinder 6 and 5, it was in a really, really bad shape and was leaking oil and even a little bit of coolant out of there. And that's what prompted the head refresh. So the cylinder head is pretty much brand new. Only has a couple thousand miles, if even that, on it, probably less than 1,000 miles on it. So a pretty fresh S52. It dynoed at 240 some max horsepower, 250 maybe, and 235-ish foot-pounds of torque. So pretty significant upgrade in the power department compared to the M50. And it actually feels pretty quick now. The torque obviously makes a huge difference, just like it does in the new GR86 platform. And I'll be re-dynoing it again here in the near future, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but finish up what upgrades are in the engine bay here. So AFE cold air intake, or if you can even call this a cold air intake. This also has a Euro oil filter housing on it, which allows us to hook up an oil cooler to it. Those lines go to my oil cooler, which is down in the bumper. You can probably not, maybe see it down there. The black oil cooler that's attached to the bottom of the CSF racing radiator. So that's an aftermarket all aluminum racing radiator. Really thick, you can see right down here kind of how fat that thing is. So awesome radiator, Mishimoto hoses. We have an electric fan conversion. I did a video on that quite a while back, but there's a single fan, electric fan attached to the radiator. There's no more fan that's attached to the engine itself. You probably can't see it, but that little threaded piece on the front of the engine, that's where the old fan would sit, the old clutch style fan. Moving over here, you can check out the Turner Motorsports shorty headers. So these things are awesome. I bought these early on when racing autocross with the car. Cool design. You can see they're all twisted and tubular and crazy looking to create that shorty header design. And again, that's attached to the Bimmer World race exhaust. And when I did this swap on this car, nothing really crazy or fun to talk about, but it has all new sensors, plugs and things in the car, hoses, everything is new that attaches to the engine itself. It also retained the M50 intake manifold from my old car, So that's actually an upgrade, or at least in the BMW world, that's an upgrade over the S52 manifolds. That helps keep the power on the high end. And what else? I think that's mostly everything in the engine bay to help keep that stuff cool. We have Track Spec Motorsports hood vents. These were provided by Counterspace Garage. So awesome hood vents that keep that engine air coming out, or that engine heat coming out of the engine. And what else? I'm sure I'm missing something because, like I said, it's been like 9 years of owning this car almost, in all different phases of development and upgrades and things. But that's kind of the core of the new power plant. So we'll move into the interior of the car. Obviously, a lot has been done here as well. The car, you know, when I bought it, obviously had a full interior. Now it is mostly gutted and pretty much a pure race car. This thing is not street legal anymore, hasn't been for a while. I do have a TC Klein bolt-in roll bar for safety, obviously, and you can kind of see where it's bolted in down here into the floor and then into the back of the wheel well area there. New Sparco harnesses, as my old ones expired recently. Sparco seats, driver and passenger. Also have a Sparco steering wheel, and just kind of showing the rest of the interior gutting. So no more door panels. I still have a lot of work to do on getting the interior cleaned up. Like, I have carpet all in the front of the car still, which I need to get rid of eventually to save some weight. I like to cut out the extra excess metals in the doors themselves. And then another big thing eventually is a full roll cage, and then taking out the heater elements in the dash, which will save a lot of weight as well. But that's kind of a big project because you got to take a ton of crap apart. So I don't know, maybe for this next off season I'll look into that. But let's jump back into the car here. So the seat is a fixed race seat, so there's no slider or anything that I'm sitting in. In fact, both of them are fixed race seats. Obviously, I've got a lot of my gear sitting in here as well. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is the sunroof was replaced with a piece of fiberglass. This is an ultra lightweight fiberglass unit. You literally lose like 80 pounds of weight by taking out this thing. I don't know, 60 or 70 pounds maybe. But that was done very early on as well. And the dash is pretty basic for the most part, other than the Sparco steering wheel. I also have a Z3 steering rack on the car because these things from the factory, the stock 325 IS, the steering rack is so slow, it's ridiculous how many turns it takes to go to full lock. So the Z3 steering rack is much quicker, makes steering the car a whole lot easier. And paired with the Sparco steering wheel, it's a nice steering feel now compared to what the OEM setup was, and the giant OEM steering wheel, which was, I don't know, like 2 inches taller than this one in diameter. It's huge. But recently, as part of the S52 swap, we also added all of these gauges and the AEM air fuel ratio gauge as well. I just kind of remounted my data tablet mount here to try this out, see if that works. But eventually I'm getting rid of these things, and I'm going to get a race dash for the car, which I'll mount up here in the dash area. And like I said, get rid of all of this junk, all of the extra sensors and things that are attached to these, and I can utilize what is in my Link ECU. And I did forget to mention that, but the Link ECU in the engine bay is what powers the car. So Link is basically a fully blown engine management system. Think of like an AEM or a Motec or something like that. It does all kinds of stuff. They're actually super popular in the drift world as well. But anyways, the car is tuned on Link, and we're going to be adding on to that platform here soon. The car has had one tune on it, really. I had it tuned when the S52 was done and in good shape, and haven't done anything since. So let's see, I think that kind of wraps it up from an upgrade perspective. I'm trying to think what else I might have forgotten. We talked about bushings and things. Shifter bushings I've replaced as I'm looking at my shifter here. A lot of stuff has been deleted. Obviously the heated seats, because I don't have the OEM seats in here. All of that stuff has been taken out. All of the wiring for the moonroof or the sunroof, all of the door wiring and things like that. Some of it can't be removed completely, so it's like tucked away in the doors there. Airbags have all been removed as well. Obviously there's not an airbag in the steering wheel, but there's not an airbag in the passenger side as well either. So I think that kind of covers everything for the car that I can think of right now. I mean, the core of the car, like I said, S52 for the powertrain, M3 diff in the rear, MCS suspension for the suspension components, along with Vorschlag, Eibach, Hyperco, SPC, kind of making up the suspension components of the system. And then of course the aero and other bits and things done by my old race shop, SCR Performance in Colorado, and then all the other bolt-on crap that we've put on it over the years. The wrap was also new, probably 2 years now. This was done back in Colorado, and I don't even remember the wrap company that I used, but they did a great job, and it looks pretty cool. So what's next with this car? So first things first, I'm actually racing this coming weekend. It'll be my first kind of race of the 2023 season in the car. I'm just running it as is. Like I said, I still need to re-dyno it and kind of finalize where it's gonna sit in class. It's gonna be a TT4 car. I wanted to get it back into NASA TT5, but I just don't think it's gonna happen because of the power that it makes now. Even with the tire rule changes, you can run a really slow Maxxis tire or something else like that, but you get a big boost in penalty points, or I guess big reduction in penalty points, depending on how you look at it, when you run a super slow tire. So I can run a super slow tire and add a whole bunch of power to the car, or keep the sticky Hoosiers on the car and run less power, which is probably what I'm going to do, because I couldn't add another 50 or 60 or 70 horsepower to this engine. Even if I tried, I don't think I could add cams to the engine. That might get me a little bit, but we'll see. Anyways, what I have coming up for the car, I do have new injectors for the car. When I had it tuned the first time, the injectors were maxing out their duty cycle, especially for the hot ones, 5 and 6, which in these engines typically run a little bit hotter than others. So we needed more fuel to the car. So I've got new 24-pound fuel injectors. I've got a 3.5 bar fuel pressure regulator, so we can get more fuel into the car. That should make it safer and allow us to have a little bit more freedom in the tuning. So that'll be happening after this race. I got another dyno session actually first week of February. So I have to get that done really soon. And then the other part, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, was taking advantage of the Link ECU and all of the capabilities that it has. So like I mentioned, when I did the S52 swap, I installed all of these old style gauges with sensors in the engine bay. And it's really tough. I've learned to actually watch gauges like that when you're on the track and see if something is going wrong or overheating or there's not enough oil pressure, because I do have oil pressure, I have oil temp and then coolant temp, as well as the AFR gauge on there. I never have time to look at those things. I barely have time to look at my own lap timer to see how quick of a lap I am doing or if I'm on pace. So what we're gonna do is get rid of all of those gauges, get rid of the AFR gauges, and get different sensors that I can link up to my Link ECU or tie into my Link ECU. And then the ultimate goal is to have a race dash, like I mentioned, from AIM or something similar that I'll install on the car, and then I can pull CAN data from the Link ECU into the dash. And then the dash, you can actually set up warnings and alarms that'll beep and flash at you if something's going wrong on the dash, which is right in front of your face. So that's kind of the plan. I have some of the sensors and the CAN Lambda ready, or ordered, I should say, not ready. I have that stuff ordered. That'll happen after this first race here. And then still looking for a dash. So I need an AIM dash. They're not cheap, and trying to find one. So but that's kind of the plan for the future here. New injectors, retune, kind of redo the sensors and data analysis and the dash on the car, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to racing there and bring more footage of this thing as well. So that's that, my 1994 325 IS, now partially, mostly M3 BMW. Hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, please leave them down below like usual. And I hope to see you in future videos. Click that subscribe button as well if you have not done so already. We got all kinds of racing, as I mentioned, for this car coming up in this new year, and I'm really looking forward to it and hopefully bringing you some of that action as well. So thanks again, everybody. Stay safe out there. I am checking out. We'll talk to you all next time.